What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of $50 Upgrades, the show where I take a Precon for you and give you my suggested $50 upgrades for it. And what no better way to start this week off of Edge of Eternities content than talking about the new Edge of Eternities Precons. And today, we're talking about World Shaper, the Jund Precon, headed up by Hearthhull, the World Seed. Remember that with the release of Edge of Eternities, all spacecraft, legendary spacecraft that have power and toughness on their bottom are going to be legal commanders. And so Wizards decide to celebrate it by making Hearthhull the leader of the deck, a 4-mana Jund spacecraft. And you use the station mechanic. You could tap another creature you control to put counters on it equal to the creature's power. And then as soon as the station hits their bottom ability, they become a creature. So if you get to 2+, Hearthhull allows you to tap, pay 1, sacrifice a land to draw 2 cards and play an additional land this turn. And when it gets to 8, Hearthhull gains flying, vigilance, haste, and whenever you sacrifice a land, each opponent loses 2 life. The goal of our deck is really simple. We want to sacrifice lands and ideally play them back out of our graveyard for value. The deck does a really good job of this. There's a lot of really great new cards and a lot of really great reprints in this deck. And so the goal of the $50 upgrade is really simple, to try to add synergy for the money. We're not trying to go for big splashy cards. We're not trying to hit that $40 mythic, to put in your deck. We're trying to use all 50 of our dollars to be as synergistic as possible and add better pieces to each game you're going to see with your deck. I'll give you my suggestions what I'm going to add. I'll tell you what I would take out. What I'm going to take out is not a suggestion of what cards are bad in the deck. They're just what I took out in order to make the deck work, as well as I'll give you some suggestions on the next few cards I would add as your budget goes up. If you're interested in seeing a brew for Hearthhull without budget in mind, consider going over to the channel today, and you could see my budget, about $400 brew for Hearthhull, if you're interested in seeing what a little bit less of the budget conversation would give you. I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a teeny bit earlier for just $1 a month, consider checking it out down below. Remember that the goal, is to add synergistic pieces. So the goal is, as much as we can, every piece should do what we want to do. And the first 3 are a trio of cards that let us play lands from our graveyard. I think the ideal line for this deck is you're going to sacrifice a land to something and then play it back out of your graveyard to get all the landfall abilities when it comes in. And also just not be down lands, by sacrificing your abilities. And we could do this a couple different ways. Ancient Greenwarden lets you play lands from your graveyard, but it also doubles up all of your landfall abilities. A really interesting ability that's going to let us have each of the landfall those abilities in our deck get us more value every time. Conduit of Worlds just let us flat play lands from our graveyard, but we can, as long as we haven't cast a spell this turn, cast a permanent, non-land permanent from our graveyard, but that's the only spell we could cast this turn. It's a very odd ability, but I think you're going to find those times where there's those things trapped in your graveyard you really want, and Conduit's going to help you get it back out of it. Probably my single favorite add to this deck, and it's going to be an add to a lot of graveyard decks, is Icetill Explorer. A 4-mana 2/4 that says we can play an additional land on each of our turns, and we can play lands from our graveyard. This kind of gives you the best of both worlds. This is a copy of Exploration and Enchantment that just lets you play another land in each of your turns, but also lets you play lands back out of your graveyard. Great when you could sack a land, get it to your graveyard, and then immediately play it back with Icetill Explorer. And then when you do play land, you mill a card, potentially allowing you to have more lands in your graveyard to play with the Explorer. Explorer is well worth the money. This is a card I expect probably will see a small rise over time, as although it's a rare in a standard set, it's a very good card, and I think it's going to see a lot of play. Insidious Roots is an enchantment that lets all of your creatures tap for mana. This is important because a lot of landfall abilities do make tokens when lands come in, so we can use those tokens for mana. But if we have any way to reanimate creatures out of our graveyard, which we're in black, we have ways to do that. We can make tokens and then put counters on all of our plans. So this is a fun way to kind of pay off making the tokens with landfall, as well as potentially pay off creatures leaving your graveyard if you can do that. Life from the Loam is well loved in these graveyard land decks for its Dredge ability. Dredge says if you would draw a card, you mill this many cards instead, and then you put this card back into your hand. So what Life from the Loam is going to do is allow you to fill up your graveyard with lands. It can work to get lands back in your hand if that's what you need, but I think Life from the Loam does a really good job at helping you start to fill your graveyard with lands to allow your other cards to start interacting with your graveyard and bringing things back. Nissa is almost one of the perfect commanders for this, sorry, perfect planeswalkers for this style of deck, because she has abilities that just really function what we want to do. Anytime a land comes in, she gets a loyalty counter, which is a great ability. Her +1 can untap a land and make it into a creature till end of turn. Not as useful. What we really like is her -5. You could put a creature card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from either your hand or your graveyard with a couple of counters on it. This is a really big deal because you either cheat it in from your hand or back from your graveyard. I mean, let's say you milled it or something, you can get it back and you get to pick the creature. You know what it's going to be ahead of time. And Nissa hopefully should just grow off her landfall trigger, getting you all these counters +1ing every turn to make sure she has a high loyalty total. That way you could start -5ing and just bringing key things back in or cheating them out of your hand. Ramunap Excavator is another copy of this key ability we want to see, and one I was a little surprised wasn't in the Precon, just playing lands from your graveyard. It's a bummer that doesn't have anything else on it, but again, it's an example of one of the first cards they made that had this type of ability, and so although it's still very well loved for that, you could definitely see cards like Icetill Explorer being a little bit better than since they were designed more recently. Retreat to Hagra is one of the best landfall triggers in our deck, or one of the best styles of landfall triggers in our deck, including Sabotender beside it. These landfall triggers, they're going to damage deal to our opponents. Sabotender deals 1 to each opponent. Hagra actually has everybody lose a life when we gain life. The effective same result, but the point is every land's coming in is knocking your opponent a damage down one by one, making it easier to knock them out, and hopefully hurting our opponents along the way could be the big difference between ending a game. Tannuk, same thing from the main set, dealing a damage to each opponent every time a land comes in, but the second time it happens, we get to draw a card, which is a great ability. And again, I think this damage is really important. When you start getting into these turns in the deck where you're having 4 or 5 lands coming in a turn, using lands that sacrifice themselves to go get other lands, or replaying them back out of your graveyard, 4 or 5 damage a turn is a huge deal, especially when you don't factor in the other combat damage you can do. 6, whenever it attacks, you're going to mill 3 and then put a land from your choice among them into your hand. But its big ability we really care about is, as long as it's our turn, non-land permanent cards in our graveyard have retrace. So those non-land permanents in our graveyard we can cast by pitching a land in addition to the other types. Of course, this works great with this play the lands back out of our graveyard shtick, right? Because then we're pitching the lands to play the permanents maybe that got destroyed or got milled, and then getting the lands back out with their other abilities. Provisioner just adds another great landfall trigger, allowing us to make treasures whenever lands come in. Remember that treasures can tap and sacrifice themselves to get mana of any color. So we're basically just netting mana off playing our lands in. And of course, even better, right, when you're potentially playing a land that has to come in tapped. Walk-in closet is a room. So if you didn't play during Duskmourn, what you're going to do is you're going to pick one side to cast, and only that side's going to be unlocked on the battlefield. And then at any time you can cast a sorcery, you can unlock the other side. Walk-in closet's the main one we care about. This is going to let us play lands from our graveyard. But then on a future turn for 5 mana, we can cast spells from our graveyard this turn, except if it was a spell that doesn't hit the battlefield, it goes into exile. This is another, again, huge opportunity to play lands from our graveyard, and then on a future turn, really extend our hand into our graveyard, right, to play key things. One of cards that is really important to our deck, I believe it's actually in the deck in Splendid Reclamation, is a spell that brings all the lands from your graveyard back to the battlefield tapped. And we got another version of that just last set, or 2 sets ago in Tarkir, in Will of the Sultai. A big spell that if we control our commander, we can do both, which is nice, because we hopefully will be controlling Hearthhold when we do it. First mode lets you mill 3 and then bring all lands from your graveyard back to the battlefield tapped, and then you can give a creature a bunch of counters and trample until end of turn, where X is the number of lands you control. Again, the goal here is we're either milling ourselves, or we're sacking lands, or we're getting things into our graveyard, and then bring them all back at once for a bunch of gain, and hopefully a big swing towards our opponents. And then Zuran Orb is a card that's going to help us really fund this sack a land, bring it back mechanic. Zuran Orb is a 0 mana artifact that lets you sacrifice a land to gain 2 life. So sack a land to the graveyard, play it back, hopefully, and then we're profiting on the sacrifice side, and we're profiting on the landfall side. Like I said before, just because we're removing these cards doesn't mean that they're good cards. It means that the cards that I chose to remove in order to make what I thought my version of the most synergy happen. I'm going to show you all of them on screen. I'm not going to talk about every single card, but I'm going to talk about the cards that I think are really good and I think could be worth it, depending on where your value is in some of these cards. Binding the Old Gods is probably one I would guess probably one of the most played sagas, especially in the colors that it's in. Remember, the sagas, the abilities go off in the order that they're shown. First one comes in and destroys a non-land permanent opponent controls. Second one goes gets you the land. Third one gives all your creatures death touch. I love binding. Just truthfully, I think paying off what we're trying to do is a whole lot more important than a good stuff saga. But again, I could see why someone would want that in their deck. I like the idea of God-Eternal Bontu coming in and sacking in ever permanents and drawing that many cards. Makes sense, right? Come in, sack lands, and draw. Sacking lands to draw is a little bit dangerous and something that you need to make sure you know what you're signing up for, because it doesn't mean that you're going to get all of them back 1-to-1. So you need to be very careful with how much you value that, whether it's something like God Eternal Bontu or something like Nahiri's Lithoforming. Just be careful how much stock you put into that ability and make sure you're aware of what the consequences could be. Mayhem Devil is one of those cards that I went really far back and forth on taking out of the deck. I think it does everything the deck wants to do, dealing out damage to any target whenever a player sacrifices a permanent. But I decided to take Mayhem Devil out for Sabotender and Tannuk and Hagra specifically, because I think I'm going to be a whole lot more able to pay off the landfall than I am the one sacrifice off the Devil. Yes, I'm trading my opponents potentially sacrificing things and making me regret that statement. But I think the difference is I'm going to be better able to manipulate the landfall, especially with things like Evolving Wilds or fetch lands that are going to allow you to have it come in, sacrifice, and go get another land. You're getting 2 landfall triggers in a turn. It could be 2-4, damage in a turn, versus just Mayhem getting you 1 here or there. I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to immediately disagree with me on that, but that's my philosophy. That's the reason for the cut and why I think I value the landfall side of it just a teeny bit more. I think the other reason is as this deck goes up in the bracket value, you're playing large spells like Scapeshift, which we'll talk about in a second. You're playing things that are going to let you replay the same lands back out of your graveyard to go get lands over and over again, and you're going to see the landfall triggers just pile up. And so that's why I think I value the landfall side of it a little more than I value the sacrifice side of it. But I can see why, somebody would otherwise. I was a little confused by the 1 waste. I didn't know if it was for something like Worldbreaker or something else, but we have almost no use when we take Worldbreaker out for colorless mana, so I took the waste out. Windgrace's Judgment is a pretty classic Precon removal spell. It's a really fun spell. For each opponent, basically, you get to destroy a non-land permanent that player controls. I love it. 5 mana for 3 permanents is pretty good if you think about it rate-wise. But I think synergy is the name of the game here, and that's why I made the decisions I made. But I don't want to just stop at $50. I think it's easier just to say, here's 12 cards, buy them, and cut the video. I think I want to, what I've tried to do through both Tark here and Final Fantasy, is do a good job at kind of saying, these would be my next steps. And we talked about Scapeshift, and here's Scapeshift. For 4 mana, you could sack any number of lands, go get that many lands from your library and put them on the battlefield. No restrictions on what they are, just sack them, bring them back. Scapeshift is an example of a card where when you see it and you put it in the right scenario, it is probably going to blow the doors down. But it is 1 card in the 99. For some people who want to get this check up into bracket 4, they're going to happily pay the $45 for Scapeshift, and it's not going to matter. Even its special guest printing that just got reprinted is about this value. But I think for a more budget-conscious player, as much as I love Scapeshift, it's going to be 1 card in your 99 you may not ever see. I'd rather you spend that $40 elsewhere and get more value every time, rather than those great games where you play Scapeshift, right? Crop Rotation is an interesting spell, and it's used in a lot of decks to go find certain lands. So you can sack a land to just go get a land of your choice. Now, the land you go to get off of Crop Rotation will depend on how much, I think, money you've put into this. When you start looking for lands like Field of the Dead and Lotus Field, and you start getting these better lands that do more, but they also come with a price tag, I think Crop Rotation gets better and better and better. Right now, Crop Rotation could be the difference between you making sure you have all your colors at the right time. There's a lot of views on how you can use Crop Rotation. I think it's a great card. It just didn't fit the budget barely for the $50 upgrade, but I think it's great. Now, we're playing Conduit of Worlds in the deck, in the upgrades, but the better version, the version most people view as the pinnacle of this ability, is Crucible of Worlds. 3 mana artifact that lets you play lands from your graveyard. I like Crucible. It's a great card. We're playing enough of versions of this effect, and obviously we'd always welcome more if that's what we really, really want to do. But Crucible does come with a $25 price tag, which I think is important to note, that we showed a bunch of other cards that have this ability for cheaper, and you can get more access to them in your deck. I think a lot of players, as you go higher up in the power level, are going to look at, well, I need X number of this ability, and I don't care what price is attached to it. Whereas some players, especially in the bracket 3 level, if you're or you're just putting $20 into the Precon, your thought process is, I want to spend my money the best I can to make the best choices of the cards I can. And I don't think Crucible does that, whereas I think Conduit does. I hope you can kind of see the juxtaposition there. We talked about those lands off of crop rotation. Here they are: Field of the Dead and Lotus Field. Field of the Dead is a land that comes in tapped, only taps for colorless, but it says whenever it or another land comes into our control, if we have 7 or more lands with different names, we get to make a zombie token. So this can start making you tokens that you can use for plenty of other things. As the deck goes up in power level, you may look into some aristocrat states payoffs, trying to sacrifice those land or those tokens for value. But I think Field still has some value, even if you're not trying to play that game plan. It's just a $35 price tag's a little steep. I think Lotus Field's a little bit more accessible to you. When it comes in tapped. When it comes in, you have to sacrifice 2 other lands, but it taps for 3 mana of any one color. And again, Lotus Field's nice because that's 2 lands you could sacrifice and play back out of your graveyard. 2 lands you could sacrifice and trigger Hearthhole and Zeril and some of the other great abilities in the deck. I think it's a little bit more attainable for what we're trying to do, right? Rather than the Field of the Dead. And then Exploration is a 1 mana green enchantment that just lets you play an additional land on each of your turns. This ability is stapled on some of the other creatures in our deck. And Exploration is a great card, and you're going to see it played in a lot of lands decks. But I think if budget is your focus, I think you want to try to find creatures that have this ability on it. Oracle Moldiah, Azusa Lost But Seeking. Find creatures that have this ability. They're going to be a little bit cheaper than $20. I think Azusa's 9, Oracle's I think like 4. There's better options for this ability, and even maybe potentially 2 lands on each of your turns instead of 1. But the reason Exploration is priced out and how good it is because it's just 1 mana to get down, whereas those creatures are 3-4 mana, right? So if you're someone who doesn't care about the budget side, look for Exploration, look for the Azusas of the world, and you're going to get everything you want to get, sacking and playing 4 or 5 lands a turn. But if you're on the budget side, I would recommend, do your research. This is not an ability that's just on Exploration, and try to find your niche. But I want to thank you so much for watching my upgrade. I hope that you got some ideas at minimum, at maximum. I hope these upgrades can help you in your exploration into the World Shaper Precon, Jund decks in general, and even just these land sacrifice graveyard decks. There's a whole lot of fun out there. I think Edge of Eternities has some great cards for this deck, as we saw. And this is a deck that's going to continue to get more support in the future. This is a deck that is going to be upgradable in the future. Many more sets are going to offer land-based cards for you to try out. So I think this is a great Precon that you're going to be able to upgrade in the future. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think, and I will catch you on the next one.